I'm Tansy Sterling, 32, and I just became the youngest woman to orchestrate a nine-figure hostile takeover in the tech sector. 5 years ago, I was a very different person, standing on the wrong side of a mahogany table that cost more than my annual salary. I remember the smell of that boardroom at Vexter Media vividly: stale coffee, dry cleaned wool suits, and the metallic tang of aggressive air conditioning that never quite cooled the room down. My hands were shaking so badly I had to press my folder against my chest just to steady them. I had spent 6 months of sleepless nights drafting the digital transformation proposal. It wasn't just a document, it was the future of the company, a roadmap to save Vexter from becoming obsolete in a market that was eating dinosaurs like us for breakfast. I took a breath that rattled in my lungs and slid the binder toward Arthur Vance. Arthur was the CEO, a man who wore his arrogance like a second skin and treated the office like his personal country club. I watched his thick fingers drum on the leather cover. He didn't open it. He didn't even look at the executive summary I had spent weeks refining. He just looked at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners with amusement, not respect. "What is this, Tansy?" he asked, his voice booming in the quiet room. "It's the strategy for the Q3 pivot, sir," I said, my voice sounding thinner and smaller than I intended. "If we shift to a cloud-based model now, we can undercut the competition by 40%. Arthur looked at the binder, then back at me, and then he started to laugh. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a wet, hacking laugh that started deep in his chest and echoed off the glass walls. He laughed until he coughed, wheezing as he wiped a tear from his eye. The other 5 men in the room, VPs who had ignored my emails for years, looked down at their shoes or smirked into their coffee mugs. "Oh, honey," Arthur said, gasping for air, pushing the binder back toward me with the tip of his pen as if it were contaminated. "Stick to booking my flights and ordering the lunch catering." I felt the blood drain from my face, only to come rushing back in a tidal wave of humiliation. "You're a sweet girl, Tansy, really," he continued, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "But you're a naive little secretary playing dress-up in the big leagues. Leave the thinking to the men who actually built this place." My skin felt like it was blistering. The heat rising up my neck was so intense I thought I might actually catch fire right there on the Persian rug. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a deafening drumbeat that drowned out the hum of the projector. He hadn't just rejected my work, he had erased my intellect. I reached out and took the binder back, my knuckles white. I didn't cry. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing a single tear. But as I turned on my heel and walked toward the heavy oak doors, the shame in my gut began to harden into something cold, heavy, and incredibly sharp. I looked back at him one last time as he made a joke to the VP of sales, completely forgetting I was even in the room. He thought he was looking at a secretary. He had no idea he was looking at the woman who was going to buy the chair he was sitting in. I hadn't even made it back to the safety of my cubicle before the second blow landed, harder and faster than the first. I heard the heavy thud of the boardroom doors swinging open behind me. "Actually, Tansy, don't bother sitting down." Arthur's voice rang out across the open plan office, cutting through the low hum of typing and phone calls like a serrated knife. Every single head in the bullpen turned. The silence that descended was instant and absolute. I froze, my hand hovering over the back of my ergonomic chair. Arthur marched into the main workspace, his face flushed with the adrenaline of his own cruelty. "I can't have insubordination poisoning my floor," he announced, loud enough for the interns in the back corner to hear. "We don't pay you to daydream, and we certainly don't pay you to waste executive time." My stomach dropped through the floor. He wasn't just rejecting the plan, he was making a show of me. "Pack your things," he sneered, checking his Rolex as if dismissing me was cutting into his tea time. "You're done, effective immediately." I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked around the room, searching for a sympathetic eye, but my coworkers, people I had bought birthday cakes for, people I had covered shifts for, suddenly found their spreadsheets incredibly fascinating. "I need your badge," a deep voice rumbled beside me. I jumped. It was Paul, the head of building security. He at least had the decency to look ashamed, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above my left shoulder. "I'm sorry, Miss Sterling," he whispered, his hand extended. Mr. Vance called it in from his phone. My fingers trembled as I unclipped the plastic ID from my blouse. It felt like I was handing over my identity. "I just need to get my purse," I managed to say, my voice shaking so hard it vibrated in my throat. I reached for the small, potted succulent on the corner of my desk, a tiny zebra cactus I had named Spike that had survived 3 years of fluorescent lighting. It was the only living thing in this sterile gray wasteland. "Leave it," Arthur barked, stepping into my personal space. I recoiled, clutching the plant. "It's mine," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Everything on that desk was purchased with company funds or resides on company property," Arthur spat, looming over me. "Security, escort her out, now." Paul gently put a hand on my elbow. The contact burned. I set the plant back down, my vision blurring as hot tears threatened to spill over. I grabbed my purse and a half-empty cardboard box from under my desk, tossing in a framed photo of my dog and my spare cardigan. "Let's go, Tansy," Paul urged softly, trying to spare me further wreckage. I began the long walk toward the elevators. It felt like a funeral procession of one. I could feel 50 pairs of eyes burning holes into my back. Arthur wasn't done, though. He snatched up the binder I had left on the edge of my desk, my business plan, my 6 months of life, my soul on paper. He walked parallel to me, matching my pace as I headed for the exit. We reached the heavy glass doors of the lobby at the same time. There was a large, chrome industrial trash can right by the reception desk. Arthur stopped. He held the binder up, making sure I was watching. He made sure I saw the logo I had hand-designed on the cover. "Garbage in, garbage out," he said with a smirk that made my blood run cold. He dropped the binder. It hit the bottom of the empty metal bin with a sound that echoed through the marble lobby like a gunshot. Bam! The heavy lid slammed shut, sealing my hard work away with the coffee grounds and sandwich wrappers. "Have a nice life, honey," he called out, turning his back on me before the elevator doors even opened. I stepped into the lift, and as the doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of his smug back, I finally let out a jagged, broken breath. Paul didn't say a word as he walked me to the street entrance. He swiped his card to let me out, and the automatic doors hissed open. The weather had turned while I was inside. A freezing gray sleet was coming down in sheets, attacking the pavement with relentless misery. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The cold hit me instantly, biting through my thin blouse. I didn't have an umbrella. Within seconds, the icy rain had soaked through my hair, plastering it to my skull. My cardboard box began to disintegrate in my hands. The bottom went soggy, and I had to clutch it against my chest to keep my few meager belongings from spilling into the gutter. I stood there, shivering violently, teeth chattering so hard I thought they might crack. Passers-by hurried around me, annoyed that I was blocking the flow of foot traffic, bumping my shoulder without an apology. I turned around and looked up at the Vexter Media Building. It towered above me, a monolith of steel and glass glowing with warm, golden light against the stormy sky. I could see the light on the 14th floor. Arthur was up there right now, probably laughing, probably pouring a scotch, probably erasing me from the payroll system with a click of a mouse. I wiped the rain from my eyes, but it just kept coming. The humiliation in my gut stopped burning. It froze. It crystallized into something hard and unbreakable, like a diamond formed under the crushing pressure of the earth. I looked at the revolving doors where I had walked in every morning for 5 years with a smile and a coffee. "I'm going to buy that trash can," I whispered to the wet pavement. The wind whipped the words away, but I heard them. "I'm going to buy that trash can," I said louder, my voice cracking. I looked up at the 14th floor, my eyes narrowing against the stinging sleet. "I'm going to buy the trash can, I'm going to buy the building, and I'm going to fire you, Arthur Vance." I didn't know how. I didn't have $1 to my name, and my rent was due in 3 days. But as I turned to walk toward the subway, shivering in the freezing rain, I knew one thing for certain. The secretary he fired was dead. The CEO who would destroy him had just been born. I'm Tansy Sterling, 28 years old, and before I became the CEO who hostile takeovered her ex-boss, I was a woman living on 99-cent ramen in a basement that flooded every Tuesday. The first week after Arthur fired me wasn't a battle, it was a ghost story. I sat in my sunny, one-bedroom apartment in the Heights, the one I had been so proud to lease, and I waited for the phone to ring. I had a resume. I had 5 years of flawless performance reviews. I had contacts at every major media firm in the city. I thought I would be hired within 48 hours. I was delusional. By day 3, the silence was so loud it made my teeth ache. I sent out 50 applications. I got 0 responses, not even an automated rejection email. It was like I had ceased to exist in the digital world. On the 4th day, I cracked. I called Marcus, a headhunter I had worked with to place interns at Vexter. We had grabbed drinks. We were friends, or so I thought. "Marcus, it's Tansy," I said, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm not sure if you saw my email, but I'm on the market and—" "Tansy, stop," he cut me off. His voice wasn't friendly. It was cold, clipped, and terrified. "Don't call this number again." My stomach twisted into a knot. "Marcus, what's going on? I just need a lead on." "Arthur made calls, Tansy," he whispered, his voice dropping as if he were afraid his office walls had ears. "He called everyone, the partners at Helix, the board at Omni, everyone." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What did he say?" I asked, my voice barely a squeak. "He said you were mentally unstable," Marcus said rapidly. "He said you had a breakdown in the office, and he said you attempted to steal proprietary client data on your way out." The room spun. "That's a lie," I screamed, standing up in my empty living room. "He threw my plan in the trash. He fired me for having an idea." "It doesn't matter what the truth is," Marcus hissed. "He's Arthur Vance, you're a secretary. He threatened legal action against anyone who hires you for aiding and abetting corporate espionage. You're radioactive, Tansy, do not call me again." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He hadn't just fired me. He had salted the earth so nothing could ever grow where I stood. I sank to the floor, the carpet scratching against my legs. I cried for 3 hours. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. Then I looked at my bank account. I had $1,200 in a lease I couldn't afford. The eviction notice came 2 weeks later. I didn't fight it. I packed my life into 4 cardboard boxes and sold everything else. My ergonomic chair sold. My designer handbags that I had saved months for sold for cash at a pawn shop. My pride gone. I moved into a basement studio in the East End that smelled like damp laundry and desperation. The walls were paper thin. I could hear my neighbor coughing all night. a dry, hacking sound that reminded me of Arthur's laugh. There was one window, a small rectangle near the ceiling that looked out onto a dirty alleyway where stray cats fought over chicken bones. This was my new kingdom. I set up my laptop on a folding card table I found on the curb. It was the only piece of furniture I owned besides a mattress on the floor. I went to the grocery store and bought a bulk box of generic chalky protein bars and 3 cases of instant coffee. I calculated the calories. If I ate 1 bar a day, I could survive for 3 months. I sat down at the card table. I opened the laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim, moldy room. I didn't open LinkedIn. I didn't open a job board. I opened a code editor. Arthur said I was a secretary. Arthur said I was a naive girl playing dress up. He forgot that I was the one who fixed the server when it was out. He forgot that I taught myself Python during his 3-hour executive lunches. He forgot that the business plan he threw in the trash wasn't just a concept. It was a blueprint I had already started building in my head. I cracked my knuckles. "Okay, Arthur," I whispered to the peeling paint on the wall. "You want to say I stole company secrets? I'll build something that makes your company secrets look like cave drawings." I started coding. I didn't stop. For 6 months, I lived in a fugue state. I woke up, drank black coffee that tasted like battery acid, and typed until my fingers cramped into claws. I built the backend architecture from scratch. I designed the algorithms that would automate the media buying process. The very thing Arthur said was impossible for a computer to do. I lost track of days. I lost track of the seasons. Summer turned to autumn outside my tiny window, but inside it was always just the blue light and the cursor blinking. Blink, blink, blink. My hair grew long and tangled. My skin turned a translucent, sickly gray. I lost 15 pounds because I often forgot to eat the protein bars until my hands started shaking so bad I couldn't hit the keys. The isolation was a physical weight. I didn't speak to a single human being for weeks at a time. My voice grew rusty. Sometimes, late at night, when the code wouldn't compile and the error messages piled up in red text like blood on the screen, I would lie on the mattress and stare at the water stains on the ceiling. The doubt would creep in. Maybe he was right. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe I'm just a girl in a basement wasting her life on a revenge fantasy. Then I would close my eyes and I would hear it. Bam! The sound of the trash can lid slamming shut. The sound of my soul being discarded. And the rage would reignite in my chest, hot and pure and violent. I would drag myself back to the card table. I would wrap a blanket around my shoulders to fight the draft, and I would type harder. I wasn't just coding a platform, I was forging a weapon. Every line of code was a bullet. Every bug I fixed was a crack in Arthur's armor. I spent 18 hours a day in that chair. My eyes were permanently bloodshot, red veins mapping the geography of my exhaustion. But the vision in my head was getting clearer. I could see the interface. I could see the dashboard. I could see the logic flow that would undercut Vexter Media's pricing by 40% while delivering double the efficiency. It was elegant. It was vicious. It was perfect. One rainy Tuesday in November, exactly 6 months after I walked out of that lobby, I hit compile on the final build of the prototype. I held my breath. The progress bar crawled across the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. 98%, 99%. Build successful. The dashboard loaded. It was beautiful. It hummed with potential. I sat back in my folding chair, the plastic creaking under my weight. I picked up the last protein bar from the box. I took a bite, and for the first time in half a year, it didn't taste like chalk. It tasted like victory. I looked at the screen, glowing in the darkness of my damp, miserable studio. Ready or not, Arthur, I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. I wasn't a secretary anymore, I was the competition. I had the engine of a Ferrari sitting on my laptop hard drive, but I didn't have the gas to start it. My prototype was functional. My logic was sound, but cloud servers cost money. API keys cost money. Even the domain name I wanted cost $12 I didn't have. I needed an investor, but I was the leper of the New York tech scene. Arthur's blacklisting had been thorough. I had been laughed out of 3 VC offices before I even opened my slide deck. One junior associate actually used my resume as a coaster for his iced latte while I was still talking. So I lowered my standards. I lowered them all the way to the floor. I sat in the Daily Grind, a coffee shop on 4th Street that smelled of burnt beans and wet dog. Across from me sat Kyle. Kyle was a sophomore computer science major I found on a subreddit for aspiring developers. He was wearing a hoodie that hadn't been washed in a week. He was my last hope for a co-founder who could maybe borrow money from his parents. So, I said, my voice tight with desperate enthusiasm, the algorithm anticipates the ad spend before the bid is even placed. It's a predictive model. It saves the client 40% instantly. I turned my laptop around to show him the dashboard. Kyle didn't look at the screen. He was scrolling through TikTok on his phone. Kyle, I said, snapping my fingers. He looked up, blinking. Yeah, cool, he mumbled. But like, does it have a dark mode? My eye twitched. I was offering him the keys to the kingdom and he was worried about the color scheme. Forget the dark mode, I hissed. Look at the back end, look at the efficiency. I do know, he yawned, stretching his arms. Sounds kinda complicated. My dad said I should just build an app that finds clean toilets in the city. He'd fund that. I closed my laptop. I closed it slowly because if I did it fast, I would have slammed it onto his fingers. Get out, I whispered. What? Leave, I said, my voice shaking. Go build your toilet app, Kyle. He shrugged, grabbed his backpack, and shuffled out into the rain. I put my head in my hands. This was it. This was rock bottom. I was a genius living on protein bars, pitching to an idiot who wanted to map toilets. Arthur Vance had won. The kid is right, you know. The voice was deep, gravelly, and came from the table behind me. I stiffened. I turned around slowly. An old man was sitting there. He looked like he belonged in a library from the 1950s. He wore a tweed jacket with patches on the elbows and a gray raincoat draped over the chair. He was reading a physical newspaper, the Financial Times, and drinking an espresso from a tiny ceramic cup. Excuse me, I snapped. Were you listening to my private conversation? He folded the newspaper with precise, deliberate movements. Hard not to, he said without looking up. You're very loud when you're desperate. My face burned hot. I'm not desperate, I lied. I'm passionate. You're starving, he corrected. I can hear your stomach growling from here, and you're wrong about the kid. I narrowed my eyes. How is he right? He thinks an algorithm is a video game setting. He's right that it's complicated, the man said, finally looking me in the eye. His eyes were steel gray, sharp as a razor blade. People don't buy complicated, Miss Sterling. They buy magic. You're selling them the math. You need to sell them the result. My heart stopped. He knew my name. I instinctively grabbed my laptop bag, ready to run. Who are you? I demanded. Did Arthur send you? Is this another one of his sick little games to humiliate me? The man chuckled. It was a dry, dusty sound. Arthur Vance, he mused, tasting the name like spoiled milk. I haven't thought about that pompous windbag in a decade. He reached into his jacket pocket. I flinched. He pulled out a silver pen and a checkbook. I'm Elias Thorne, he said. The air left my lungs. Elias Thorne, the Wolf of Wall Street before the movie made it cool. He had retired 5 years ago after running one of the most aggressive hedge funds in history. Rumor had it he cashed out because he got bored of winning. You're Elias Thorne, I stammered. I am, he said, opening the checkbook. And I was sitting here trying to do the crossword puzzle when I heard you explaining your latency issues to that toddler. He looked at me intensely. You claim you can beat the market bid speed by 3 milliseconds. Is that true? Yes, I said immediately. Actually, on a good connection, it's 4. And the predictive modeling, it's based on historical user heat maps. No, I said, my confidence surging back like a tidal wave. History is flawed. It scans real-time cursor velocity. It knows what the user wants before they click. Elias paused. The pen hovered over the paper. That's illegal, he said softly. It's gray, I corrected. It's a loop in the privacy policy that nobody noticed. I noticed. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was a predator's smile. Everyone says you're crazy, Tansy, he said. Arthur Vance told the board at the yacht club that you had a psychotic break. He said you were unhireable. My shoulders slumped. I know what he said. Good, Elias said, because sane people are boring. Sane people don't disrupt industries. Sane people don't build weapons in basements. He scribbled something on the check. He tore it out with a crisp R-rip sound. He slid it across the sticky table past a half-empty sugar shaker. I looked down, my vision blurred. It was a check for $250,000. Seed money, Elias said, standing up and putting on his raincoat. I don't want equity yet. I want to see if you can execute. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the zeros. Why? I managed to whisper. Why me? Elias looked down at me, buttoning his coat. Because I hate Arthur Vance, he said simply. He plays golf too slow. And because I saw the code on your screen, Tansy. It's not just code, it's poetry, violent poetry. He tipped an imaginary hat. Buy some servers, buy a suit, and for God's sake, buy a sandwich. Then he walked out into the rain, leaving me alone in the dingy coffee shop with a piece of paper that weighed more than the building. I didn't buy a sandwich. I ran to the bank. Then I ran to the nearest electronics store and bought 3 monitors and a server rack. 2 days later, Sterling Edge was incorporated. I didn't rent an office. I kept the basement. It kept me angry. I set up the new equipment, the hum of the fans drowning out the coughing neighbor. I had the money. I had the power. Now I needed the target. I sat down at my new ergonomic chair, the first luxury I allowed myself. I opened the main directory for the public launch. I had to write the first line of the executable file. Normally, this would be a standard initialization command. But this wasn't a normal company. This was a hit job disguised as a startup. My fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard. I thought about Arthur laughing at my business plan. I thought about the security guard escorting me out. I thought about the rain on my face. I began to type. I didn't write a hello world greeting. I wrote a conditional loop that would run silently in the background of every client transaction we processed. If competitor ID equals VXDOR media, bid price equals competitor bid 0.01, execute priority equals immediate. It was a kill switch. It ensured that anytime Vexter Media tried to buy ad space for a client, my software would automatically detect it and underbid them by exactly 1 penny, instantly stealing the placement. It was invisible. It was petty. It was devastating. I hit save. The screen blinked, accepting the command. I leaned back in the dark, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. Arthur wanted a war. I had just nuked the battlefield before he even knew the fighting had started. I'm Tansy Sterling, 29 years old, and I am the invisible ghost currently haunting a billion-dollar corporation. 3 years passed in a blur of caffeine, blue light, and silent warfare. Sterling Edge didn't just grow, it metastasized. My algorithm was an apex predator released into a petting zoo. It ate everything. Every morning I woke up at 4:00 a.m. I didn't need an alarm clock, the adrenaline woke me up. My bedroom in my new penthouse was silent, soundproofed against the city noise below. I walked barefoot across the cold marble floor to my workstation. 6 monitors glowed in the dark. They were my window into Arthur Vance's soul. The center screen showed the live feed of the ad bidding war. It was a bloodbath. I watched a request come in from Global Motors. It was a $20 million account. Vexter Media's bot placed a bid. It took them 12 milliseconds. It was sluggish. It was pathetic. My code saw their bid, calculated the margin, and undercut them by 1 penny. It took my system 3 milliseconds. Transaction complete. Client acquired, Global Motors. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black, hot, and tasted like victory. Arthur had just lost his biggest automotive client before he even woke up to put on his silk tie. This happened 10 times a day, every day, for 3 years. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. It wasn't fear anymore, it was the high of the hunt. Sterling Edge was now the fastest growing ad tech firm in the hemisphere. But nobody knew I was running it. That was the trick, that was the knife in the dark. I had listened to Elias Thorne. I stayed off the About Us page. I refused interviews. I declined Forbes' 30 under 30 lists. I created a labyrinth of shell companies to hold the ownership papers. Nebula Holdings, Ironwood Trust, Argent Ventures. To the outside world, Sterling Edge was a faceless monolith run by a board of anonymous investors. To Arthur Vance, we were just a terrifying force of nature that he couldn't explain. I pulled up the stock market ticker on the left screen. Vexter Media, VXTR. The line on the chart looked like a staircase descending into hell. 3 years ago, they were trading at $80 a share. Today, they were hovering at 12. Red arrows everywhere. I could see the headlines scrolling on the news feed. Vexter Media bleeds talent as mystery competitor dominates market. CEO Arthur Vance under fire for third consecutive quarter of losses. I smiled. My face felt tight. I hadn't smiled properly in years, only this grim baring of teeth. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was Elias. He was the only person who had my direct line. "Did you see the opening bell?" his gravelly voice asked. "I'm looking at it," I said. "He's panic selling Tansy. He's liquidating assets to cover the quarterly earnings miss. He just sold the private jet." I laughed softly. "He loved that jet," I whispered. "He used to make the interns polish the leather seats." "He's bleeding out," Elias said. "The board is calling for a vote of no confidence. The stock is going to dip below $10 by noon." My stomach flipped. $10, that was the magic number, that was the trigger point. I had done the math 1,000 times. At $10 a share, Vexter's market cap would be low enough for a hostile takeover. But not just any takeover, a cash buyout. "Is the capital ready?" I asked. My hand was shaking as I reached for my mouse. "The funds are pooled," Elias confirmed. "The holding companies are aligned. We have the liquidity, but Tansy," he paused. "What?" "If you do this, you step into the light," he said. "Once you file the SEC disclosure, he'll know. Everyone will know." I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor. I didn't look like the scared girl in the coffee shop anymore. My hair was sharp. My eyes were cold. I wore a tailored suit that cost more than my parents' car. I wasn't afraid of the light. I was afraid Arthur Vance would get away before I could crush him. "Let him know," I said. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to just beat him," Elias I want to own him. Very well, Elias chuckled. Happy hunting, kid. The line went dead. I looked back at the stock ticker. $10.50, $10.25, $10.15. It was free falling. I opened my trading terminal. I logged into the master account for Argent Ventures. I had spent 3 years building a war chest. Every dollar of profit Sterling Edge made went into this account. I wasn't buying yachts. I wasn't buying islands. I was saving up to buy my enemy. $10.05, $10.01, $9.99. There it was, the death knell. I typed in the command, buy order, all available shares. Limit price $10, volume 51% of outstanding float. My finger hovered over the execute button. I closed my eyes for a second. I remembered the rain on my face outside the coffee shop. I remembered Arthur laughing at my slide deck. I remembered the security guard grabbing my arm. I opened my eyes. I pressed the button. Order executed. The screen flashed green. In a split second, hundreds of millions of dollars vanished from my account. And just like that, I wasn't just the CEO of Sterling Edge. I was the majority shareholder of Vexter Media. I sat back in my chair. The silence in the room was heavy. My phone started ringing immediately. It wasn't Elias this time. It was a number I hadn't seen in 3 years. It was Arthur Vance's personal office line. He didn't know it was me yet. He just knew someone had just bought his company out from under him. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I reached out and picked up the receiver. Sterling speaking, I said, my voice steady as steel. Who is this? Arthur screamed on the other end. Who the hell is this? You just triggered a regulatory halt. You can't just buy 51% of my company. Actually, Arthur, I said, savoring the syllables. I can. There was a silence on the line, a long, confused silence. That voice, he whispered. I know that voice. You should, I said. You fired it 3 years ago. Tansy, he choked out. Tansy Sterling? Hello, Arthur, I said. Don't bother packing your office. I'm coming over to do it for you. I'm Tansy Sterling, 29 years old, and I am the invisible noose currently tightening around the neck of a desperate man. The hostile takeover bid from Argent Ventures had hit the news cycle like a dirty bomb. Wall Street was in chaos. Vexter Media's stock was paralyzed, but Arthur Vance wasn't dead yet. He was a cockroach. He was a survivor. I knew he would try one last, desperate maneuver to save his kingdom from the hostile bidders. I counted on it. I had prepared for it. 2 years ago, while I was building the algorithm that would bleed his revenue dry, I had also built a trap door. I created a second shell company, Zenith Prime. I crafted it with the meticulous obsession of a master forger. I built a website that looked like it belonged to old European money. I created fake LinkedIn profiles for a board of directors that didn't exist. I planted articles in niche financial blogs praising Zenith Prime as a benevolent savior for struggling tech legacy firms. I made it look like the kind of firm Arthur idolized. Conservative, wealthy, safe. I knew that when the wolves came to his door, he wouldn't run to the police. He would run to money. I sat in my darkened penthouse, the air conditioning humming a low, artificial note. My heart rate was steady. My hands were still. On my center monitor, a private Zoom window was open. I wasn't supposed to have access to this feed, but Arthur had never updated the admin credentials for the Vexter conference room system. I had backdoored into the camera and microphone array 10 minutes ago. The room on the screen was familiar. It was the same glass-walled boardroom where Arthur had thrown my business plan into the trash bin 3 years ago. But the atmosphere was different now. The expensive fern in the corner was dying. The table was cluttered with empty takeout coffee cups and crumpled papers. And Arthur, I leaned closer to the screen. He looked like a man haunting his own life. His skin was the color of wet ash. His eyes were red-rimmed, surrounded by dark, bruised circles that spoke of sleepless nights and chemically induced wakefulness. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing forearms that looked thinner than I remembered. He was pacing. "They're 5 minutes late," Arthur snapped, his voice cracking through my speakers. He was talking to his CFO, a terrified man named Marcus who looked like he was ready to jump out the window. "They'll be here, Arthur," Marcus whispered. "Zenith Prime is serious. They sent the NDA." I smiled. I had sent the NDA. I typed a command on my keyboard. On the large screen in Arthur's boardroom, a connection initiated. I didn't use my face. I didn't use a voice actor. I used text-to-speech software modulated to sound like a 60-year-old British man and a static logo of a golden lion. "Mr. Vance," the synthetic voice boomed into his boardroom. "We are connected." Arthur stopped pacing. He practically threw himself into his leather chair. He smoothed his hair with a trembling hand. He put on a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Gentlemen," Arthur said, addressing the logo on the wall, "thank you for meeting on such short notice. As you know, Vexter is currently facing some headwinds." Headwinds, that's what he called it. I had nuked his revenue, stolen his clients, and bought 51% of his stock, and he called it headwinds. "We are aware of the hostile activity from Argent Ventures," my synthetic voice replied. "Argent is a vulture fund," Arthur spat, leaning forward, his eyes wild. "They don't understand the tech, they don't understand the vision. If they take control, they'll strip us for parts." I took a sip of water. He was right. I was absolutely going to strip it for parts. "I need a white knight," Arthur pleaded. "I need Zenith Prime to come in with a capital injection. Dilute the shares. Buy out the hostile bid. If you back me, we can turn this around in 2 quarters. I have a plan." "A plan?" I typed. "Yes," Arthur said, his voice gaining a frantic energy. "We're pivoting, we're going to crush the competition. I just need capital. I need 50 million. That stops the bleeding. That stops Argent." I watched him sweat. I could see a bead of perspiration roll down his temple and disappear into his collar. He was begging. The man who had told me I was too emotional for business was currently vibrating with hysteria. He was asking the shark to save him from the wolf. He had no idea they were the same animal. I felt a sensation in my chest that I hadn't expected. I thought I would feel giddy. I thought I would feel like laughing, but I didn't. I felt cold. I felt heavy. It was a clinical satisfaction, tasting like iron and ozone. It was the feeling of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. It wasn't fun. It was necessary. "Mr. Vance," I typed, "we have reviewed your financials." Arthur held his breath. Marcus, the CFO, closed his eyes, praying. "And," Arthur whispered, "we are a legacy brand. We have value. We found that your client acquisition costs have risen by 400% in 3 years," the voice said. "We found that you have lost every major automotive and pharmaceutical contract to a competitor named Sterling Edge." Arthur flinched at the name. "Sterling Edge is a fad," he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "They're undercutting us with cheap tricks. It's unsustainable." "It seems quite sustainable for them," the voice countered calmly. "They are profitable. You are insolvent." "I am not insolvent," Arthur screamed. "I just need a lifeline. I built this company from nothing. I am Vexter Media." I watched his face contort. He looked ugly. He looked small. I remembered standing in that room, clutching my binder while he laughed at me. I remembered him saying, "Tansy, girls like you are better suited for support roles. Leave the strategy to the men." My fingers hovered over the keys. It was time to close the trap. Zenith Prime operates on a philosophy of efficiency, Mr. Vance, the voice said. I am efficient, Arthur lied. We do not invest in sinking ships, the voice continued. We buy the wreckage after they hit the bottom. Arthur's face went pale. What are you saying? We are declining your request for a bailout. You can't, Arthur gasped. You're my last option. If you don't buy in, Argent takes over tomorrow. They'll fire me. They'll destroy my legacy. I typed the final line. Perhaps, the voice said, devoid of all mercy. Some legacies deserve to burn. I hit the disconnect button. The screen in his boardroom went black. I watched through the hidden camera feed as the room plunged into silence. Arthur stared at the blank screen. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Then, slowly, he put his head in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. He was sobbing. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of my monitors washing over me. I didn't smile. I reached for my phone. I dialed Elias. It's done, I said quietly. Did he take the bait? Elias asked. He begged, I said, and I turned him down. So he has no allies left, Elias said. He's naked. He's finished, I corrected. I stood up. My legs felt strong. My mind was clear. I walked to the window of my penthouse and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere in that grid of lights, Arthur Vance was crying in a dark room. He thought he had hit rock bottom. He was wrong. He had only just met the floor. Now I was going to bring in the excavator. Prepare the car, Elias, I said. Where are we going? To the Vexter headquarters, I said, watching my reflection in the glass. I have a board meeting to attend. You're going physically? Elias sounded worried. Tansy, the ink is barely dry. I bought the ticket, I said, my voice hard as diamond. Now I want to enjoy the show. I hung up. I went to my closet. I bypassed the gray suits. I bypassed the black blazers. I pulled out a dress the color of fresh arterial blood. Arthur hated red. He said it was too aggressive. He said it was unladylike. I zipped it up. I checked my makeup. I looked dangerous. I grabbed my bag. I wasn't just an algorithm anymore. I was the event horizon. And Arthur Vance was about to get pulled in. I'm Tansy Thorne, 29 years old, and I just became the majority shareholder of the corporation that fired me for having too much ambition. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the Vexter building, turning the skyscraper into a pillar of blinding fire. I stood on the sidewalk. I checked my reflection in the window of a parked black sedan. I wasn't wearing the red dress I had considered the night before. That would have been theatrical. That would have been emotional. Instead, I wore a charcoal suit that had been tailored in Milan, cut from wool so fine it felt like liquid shadow against my skin. The price tag on the jacket alone was more than the first 3 years of salary Arthur had paid me. It was armor. It was a weapon. I adjusted the cuffs of my silk blouse. I took a breath of the city air, tasting exhaust and triumph. I walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was exactly as I remembered it. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that chilled the sweat on your skin instantly. The floors were polished marble, a sprawling expanse of white and gray veins that echoed with the click of expensive heels. I looked at the spot near the security desk. 3 years ago, I had stood right there holding a cardboard box filled with my personal belongings. I had been crying. My mascara had been running down my face. I had dropped a stapler, and when I bent to pick it up, the security guard, a man named Jerry, had looked at me with pity. I looked for Jerry now. He was there, older, grayer, still guarding the gate to a kingdom that was crumbling. I walked up to the turnstile. My heels made a sharp, percussive sound. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. Jerry looked up. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? The girl from 3 years ago was a ghost. She was hunched, defeated, and dressed in off-the-rack polyester. The woman standing before him was posture and power. Name, Jerry asked, bored. Tansy Thorne, I said. I'm here for the board meeting. He frowned, looking down at his clipboard. I don't see a Thorne on the list, ma'am. I have the legal team from Argent Ventures expected and… I am Argent Ventures, I said. My voice was soft. It was level. It stopped him cold. He looked up at me, his eyes widening slightly. He fumbled for a guest pass. Right, sorry, go right up, Miss Thorne, top floor. Thank you, Jerry, I said. He froze as I said his name. I breezed past him before he could place me. I stepped into the elevator. I was alone. The doors slid shut, sealing me in a metal box that smelled of lemon polish and anxiety. I pressed the button for the 40th floor. The car began to rise. My stomach dropped, a physiological reaction to the G-force, but my heart remained dangerously slow. I watched the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30, my pulse was a steady, rhythmic drum of impending justice. I looked at my hands, they weren't shaking. I thought about Arthur. I thought about the email he had sent to the entire company after he fired me. He had called my departure a restructuring of non-essential personnel. Non-essential, the elevator chimed. 40. The doors opened. I stepped out onto the plush navy carpet of the executive floor. It was quiet, too quiet. The reception desk was empty. The phones were ringing unanswered. It felt like walking onto the bridge of a sinking ship after the crew had already manned the lifeboats. I walked down the long hallway toward the glass-walled boardroom. I could see them before they saw me. The glass was soundproof, turning the scene inside into a silent film. There were 6 lawyers in dark suits on one side of the mahogany table. Those were my sharks. On the other side sat Arthur Vance. He looked worse than he had on the camera feed. In 4K resolution, his ruin was spectacular. His tie was loosened. His hair was disheveled. He was shouting at one of my lawyers, gesturing wildly with a pen. He looked like a man trying to hold back the tide with a teaspoon. I reached for the heavy brass handle of the door. The cold metal bit into my palm. I pushed. The door swung open with a heavy thud. The sound in the room died instantly. Arthur spun around in his chair. Who the hell are you? He barked, his eyes struggling to focus. We are in a closed session, you can't just… He stopped, he blinked, he squinted. I didn't say a word. I walked past the lawyers. I walked to the head of the table, the seat opposite him. I placed my leather portfolio on the wood. I pulled out the chair. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I folded my hands on the table. Arthur's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at my face. He looked at my eyes. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. He fell back against his leather chair, the air leaving his lungs in a wheezing gasp. Tansy, he whispered. The name sounded foreign in his mouth. Hello, Arthur, I said. My voice was pleasant. It was the voice you use when you run into an old acquaintance at a funeral. What? He looked at the lawyers, then back at me. What are you doing here? This is a hostile takeover negotiation. You were a junior analyst. I was the head of strategy, I corrected him gently. Before you fired me. You're trespassing, Arthur stammered, his face flushing a blotchy red. Security, get security up here. He reached for the phone console on the table. Mr. Vance, the lead lawyer on my side, said. His name was Elias and he had a voice like grinding gravel. Ms. Thorne isn't trespassing. Arthur froze, his hand hovering over the receiver. She's a disgruntled ex-employee. Arthur shouted, spit flying. She has no business here. Actually, I said, I have all the business here. I unzipped my portfolio. I slid a single document across the polished mahogany. It was the deed of acquisition. I am the majority shareholder of Argent Ventures, I said, and Zenith Prime, and the 3 other shell companies that have been buying your debt for the last 18 months. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy enough to crush bones. Arthur stared at me. His brain was trying to process the impossible geometry of the situation. He choked out. You don't have money, you. You lived in a studio apartment. I built an algorithm, Arthur, I said. The one you said was too cute to work. I sold the licensing rights to your biggest competitor for 8 figures. Then I invested it against you. I leaned forward. I didn't just buy your debt, Arthur. I bought your mistakes. He looked at the papers. He looked at me. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving only a terrified old man. Tansy, he said, his voice trembling. Please, Vexter is my life. I built this. And you broke it, I said. I picked up a heavy fountain pen from the center of the table. It was Arthur's pen, a Montblanc. I had watched him sign my termination letter with it. I held it out to him. Sign the surrender, Arthur. He stared at the pen. And if I don't, then I dissolve the company by noon, I said. I liquidate the assets. I sell the patent portfolio to Sterling Edge, and you walk away with nothing but your debt. He looked at his CFO. The CFO looked at the floor. Arthur's hand shook as he took the pen from me. His fingers brushed mine. His skin was cold and clammy. Mine was warm. He looked at the paper. He looked at me one last time, searching for a trace of the girl he had bullied. He didn't find her. He uncapped the pen. He signed his name. The scratch of the nib against the paper was the loudest sound in the world. He dropped the pen. There, he whispered. Are you happy? I picked up the document. I checked the signature. It was valid. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my charcoal suit. Happy isn't the word, Arthur, I said. I looked down at him. You're sitting in my chair. Arthur flinched. He scrambled up, grabbing his jacket, looking like a rat fleeing a flood. He backed away from the table. You'll fail, he spat, trying to salvage one last shred of dignity. You don't know how to run a company this size. I smiled. It was the first time I had smiled since I entered the building. I know exactly how to run it, I said. Step 1, remove the incompetence. I pointed to the door. Get out. Arthur Vance turned and ran. I watched him go. I watched the door swing shut behind him. I looked out the glass walls at the city's skyline. I took a deep breath. The air in the room didn't smell like stale coffee anymore. It smelled like ozone. It smelled like a fresh start. I sat down at the head of the table. Elias, I said. Yes, Miss Thorne. Call the cleaning crew, I said, resting my hand on the leather armrest. I want this room sanitized. It smells like failure. I'm Sienna Cross, 28, and I just walked into a room to fire the billionaire who told me my business ideas belonged in the trash. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor took exactly 45 seconds. I counted every single one. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but my hands were dead steady. I looked at my reflection in the polished brass of the elevator doors. 3 years ago, I had left this building in an oversized hoodie, clutching a box of office supplies and crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Arthur had laughed at me that day. He had thrown my proposal, a strategic pivot that would have saved him millions, into the recycling bin while I watched. Stick to scheduling my flights, Sienna, he had said, not even looking up from his phone. You don't have the head for business. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. The air on the executive floor was thinner. It smelled of lemon polish, old money, and panic. I stepped out onto the plush carpet. My heels didn't make a sound. I was a predator moving through the underbrush. The receptionist's desk was empty. Phones were ringing off the hook, a chorus of unanswered pleas. Arthur's empire was crumbling and the rats had already fled the ship. I walked down the long hallway toward the glass-walled boardroom. I could see them inside. It looked like a scene from a silent movie. There were 5 lawyers in dark suits on the left side of the table. Those were my sharks. I paid them $1,000 an hour to smell blood in the water. On the right side sat Arthur Vance. He looked terrible. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose he'd forgotten to tighten. His face was a map of stress, red and blotchy. He was shouting, his arms flailing, pointing a finger at my lead counsel. I stopped at the heavy oak doors. I took one deep breath. I filled my lungs with the recycled air of the place that had almost broken me. Then I pushed the doors open. They swung inward with a heavy, expensive whoosh. The shouting stopped instantly. Every head in the room turned toward me. Arthur froze mid-gesture, his mouth hanging open. For a second, he didn't recognize me. Why would he? The Sienna he knew wore department store skirts and apologized for existing. The woman standing in the doorway was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit and carried herself like she owned the building. Because I didn't say a word. I walked past the lawyers. I walked past the empty chairs. I walked straight to the head of the table. Arthur's chair. He was standing next to it, clutching the leather backrest like a lifeline. I stopped in front of him. I looked him dead in the eye. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was soft. It was the same tone I used to use when I told him his lunch had arrived. Arthur blinked, his eyes darting over my face. Recognition hit him like a physical slap. "Sienna," he choked out. He sounded horrified. "You're in my seat, Arthur," I said. What? What are you doing here?" He looked around at the lawyers, searching for an explanation. "Security, why is my former secretary in a closed board meeting?" He turned to my lead lawyer, a man named Elias who looked like he ate gravel for breakfast. "Get her out of here," Arthur demanded, his voice cracking. "This is a hostile takeover negotiation. She has no clearance." "Actually, Mr. Vance," Elias said, his voice deep and bored, "she has the highest clearance." Arthur looked back at me. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I'm not the secretary anymore, Arthur." I reached into my leather portfolio. I pulled out a single, thick document bound in blue paper. I slammed it onto the mahogany table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "I'm the buyer." Arthur stumbled back. He actually stumbled, his legs hitting the edge of the chair behind him. "That's impossible," he whispered. You have student loans, you drive a Civic." "I drove a Civic," I corrected him. "Then I took the business plan you threw in the trash and I founded Cross Tech. We went public 6 months ago." I took a step closer to him. "I used the capital to buy your debt, Arthur, all of it. The bank loans, the bonds, the private equity notes. I bought it all through shell companies." I watched the realization dawn on him. It was slow and painful. He looked at the document on the table. He saw the name at the bottom, Cross Holdings. He wheezed. "You're the Vulture Fund." "I prefer strategic investor," I said coolly. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, his throne for the last 20 years. I sat down, I crossed my legs, I looked up at him. He looked small, he looked old. "Sit down, Arthur," I commanded. He hesitated, his pride warring with his reality. "Sit down," I said, sharper this time. He sank into the chair to my right, the subordinate seat. "Here are your options," I said, sliding the document toward him. "Option A, you sign the company over to me right now. You resign effective immediately. You keep your pension and you walk away with a shred of dignity." Arthur stared at the paper. His hands were shaking so badly he had to clasp them together. "And option B?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Option B is that I call in the debt," I said. "All of it, today by 5:00 p.m. I checked my watch. "Which gives you about 20 minutes before I trigger a liquidation event that will bankrupt you personally. You'll lose the house in the Hamptons. You'll lose the cars. You'll lose the reputation you care so much about." The room was dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. Arthur looked at his own lawyers. They looked at the floor. They knew the math. They knew I had him cornered. "Why?" Arthur whispered. "Why go to all this trouble just to fire me?" No, I said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. I didn't do this to fire you, Arthur. I did this to show you that you were wrong. I tapped the table with my manicured nail. You told me I didn't have the head for business. You told me I was too emotional to lead. I gestured to the room, to the lawyers, to the terrified man sitting before me. Does this feel emotional to you, or does it feel like a transaction? Arthur swallowed hard. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his gold fountain pen. It was the same pen he used to sign my termination letter 3 years ago. He uncapped it. His hand hovered over the signature line. He looked at me one last time. He was looking for mercy. He found none. He signed his name. The scratch of the nib on the paper was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. He capped the pen and pushed the document back to me. I built this company, he muttered, his eyes wet. And now I own it, I said. I picked up the document. I checked the signature. It was valid. I looked at Elias and nodded. Done, I said. I turned back to Arthur. You can go now. Arthur stood up. He looked lost. He grabbed his briefcase, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He walked toward the door. He didn't look back. I watched him leave the room, a king exiled from his own castle. The door clicked shut behind him. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for 3 years. My hand started to shake just a little beneath the table. Adrenaline, pure, uncut adrenaline. Elias cleared his throat. What are your orders, Ms. Cross? I looked around the boardroom. I looked at the view of the city skyline through the glass walls. It was my view now. First, I said, my voice steady and strong, get someone in here to change the locks, and then get me the HR files. I spun the leather chair around to face the window. I have a lot of talented people to rehire. I'm Sienna Cross, 28, and I just watched the color drain out of a billionaire's face as he realized his career was sitting in the palm of my hand. This is a joke, right? Arthur stammered. His voice was thin. It lacked the booming, baritone authority he used to wield like a weapon when he screamed at interns. His face turned a sickly shade of gray, the color of wet pavement. I slid the acquisition papers across the mahogany table. The sound of the thick paper rasping against the wood was loud in the silent room. I didn't blink. I looked him dead in the eye. I could smell him from here. It was a nauseating mix of sandalwood, his $1,000 cologne, and the sharp, sour tang of pure biological fear. It was intoxicating. Read the header, Arthur, I said. My voice was low. I didn't need to shout anymore. Shouting is for people who aren't in control. He looked down at the document. His eyes darted across the bold text at the top of the page. Notice of acquisition, VANCE Enterprises. Buyer, KROSS Global Holdings. He blinked rapidly. He looked like his brain was trying to reject the information his eyes were feeding it. Cross, he whispered. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly open. You're Cross Global? I leaned forward. I rested my elbows on the table, invading his personal space just enough to make him flinch back. I remember the trash can, Arthur, I whispered. He froze. What? He breathed. 5 years ago, I said, keeping my eyes locked on his. Tuesday morning, it was raining. I brought you a binder, blue plastic. It had a projection model for mobile integration. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed. You didn't even open it, I continued, my voice silky and cold. You held it over the metal wastebasket by your desk. You looked at me and you dropped it. I tapped my finger on the table, tap. It made a heavy, hollow thud, I said. I heard that sound every night for 2 years, thud just like that. I watched his hands begin to shake. It started in his fingers, a subtle tremor that rattled the gold cufflink against the table surface. It was the exact same tremor I used to have when he would call me into his office to berate me for the coffee being 2 degrees too cold. I told you that you were a secretary, he rasped. I told you to know your place. And I listened, I said. I found my place, it's at the head of this table. I nodded toward the document. Turn to page 42. He didn't move. Turn the page, Arthur, I commanded. He obeyed. His fingers fumbled with the corner of the paper. He tore it slightly in his haste. He stared at the figures highlighted in yellow. This is my debt, he said, his voice trembling. These are the private loans, the leverage on the Manhattan property. I bought it all, I said, every cent. I own the building we're standing in. I own the chair you're sitting in. I own the copyright to the logo on the wall behind you. I sat back, crossing my legs. I felt the cool leather of the CEO's chair against my spine. It fit me better than it ever fit him. You are technically insolvent, Arthur. You are over-leveraged and underperforming. In a normal market, you'd have 6 months to restructure. I checked my watch. It was a Patek Philippe. I bought it with my first dividend check specifically for this meeting. But I'm not a normal market, I said. I'm a hostile entity. Arthur looked at his lawyers. The 5 men in expensive suits were staring at their notepads. They wouldn't meet his eyes. They knew the shark had entered the cage. Elias, I said, not looking away from Arthur. Explain the terms. My lead counsel, Elias, cleared his throat. Ms. Cross is calling in the debt immediately, Elias said, his voice monotone and bored. Unless, of course, a settlement is reached regarding the transfer of executive power. Arthur looked back at me. His eyes were wet. He looked old. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. You can't do this, he pleaded. This company is my legacy. My name is on the door. We'll have the sign painters here by morning, I said. I reached into my blazer pocket. I pulled out a pen. It was a cheap blue plastic Bic ballpoint, the kind you find in a supply closet, the kind I used to order for him by the gross. I slid it across the table. It spun and stopped right in front of his shaking hands. Sign the resignation, Arthur. He stared at the cheap pen. It was an insult. It was a symbol. And if I don't? He asked, trying to summon a shred of defiance. Then I liquidate, I said simply. I sell the assets for parts. I strip the company down to the copper wiring. You walk away with nothing but your debt and a bankruptcy filing that will make the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I leaned in closer. I will burn this entire kingdom to the ground just to watch you choke on the smoke. Do not test me. The silence stretched. It was heavy and suffocating. I could hear the hum of the server room down the hall. I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. My heart was pounding, a war drum against my ribs, but my face was stone. Arthur picked up the cheap blue pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at the signature line. Arthur Vance, CEO. He pressed the tip to the paper. He hesitated. He looked up at me one last time. He was looking for the girl who used to fetch his dry cleaning. He was looking for the girl who cried in the elevator. She wasn't there. Sign it, I whispered. He signed. The scratch of the ballpoint on the paper was ugly and jagged. He dropped the pen. It rolled off the table and hit the floor. He slumped back in his chair, defeated. Get out, I said. Arthur looked up, startled. Sienna, get out. I pointed to the double doors. Security will escort you to the lobby. You have 5 minutes to clear your personal effects from the office. Anything left after that belongs to Cross Global. Arthur stood up. His legs were unsteady. He grabbed his briefcase. He didn't look at his lawyers. He didn't look at the view. He walked toward the doors like a man marching to the gallows. He pushed them open and stepped into the hallway. I watched him go. The heavy doors swung shut with a final, decisive click. The room was quiet. I took a deep breath. I filled my lungs with the air of the room that used to terrify me. It smelled like victory. It smelled like ozone and lemon polish and sweet, cold revenge. I looked at Elias. Draft the press release, I said. Tell the world there's a new CEO. I spun the chair around to face the window. New York City was spread out below me, a grid of steel and glass glittering in the afternoon sun. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I wasn't the girl in the hoodie anymore. I was the view. I'm Sienna Cross, 28, and I just bought a skyscraper to fire the man who told me I wasn't smart enough to work in it. I watched the cheap blue Bic pen roll across the mahogany table. It came to a stop against the leather-bound edge of his notebook. Arthur Vance was hyperventilating. It was a small sound, a wheeze like a leaking tire. He slumped back in his chair, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring at the ceiling of the office that was no longer his. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic, shallow breathing of a defeated billionaire. I reached out. My hand was steady. I didn't feel triumph yet. I felt surgical. I picked up the document he had just mangled with his jagged signature. I smoothed the paper. I pulled my own pen from my blazer pocket. It wasn't a Bic. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and cold, weighted like a weapon. I uncapped it. The sound of the cap clicking off was a gunshot in the quiet room. I looked at the line next to his, accepted by KROSS Global Holdings. I pressed the nib to the paper. The ink flowed black and permanent. I signed my name, Sienna Cross. I added a sharp flourish at the end, a line that cut through the air like a blade. The ink dried instantly. It was done. The death warrant of his career was sealed. I looked up. Arthur was still staring at the ceiling. "It's over, Arthur," I said. My voice didn't echo. It was absorbed by the plush carpet and the acoustic panels he had installed to keep his screaming matches private. He didn't move. I turned my head toward the door. A security guard was standing there. His name was Frank. I remembered Frank. 5 years ago, Frank had been the one to hold my elbow. He had been the one to hand me a cardboard box and walk me to the elevator while everyone stared. He had looked at me with pity then. He wasn't looking at me with pity now. He was looking at me with terror. He stood rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, his uniform straining against his chest. "Frank," I said. He flinched. "Yes, ma'am," his voice cracked. "Do you remember the protocol for a terminated employee?" I asked. I kept my voice conversational, light. Frank swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed. "Yes, ma'am. Immediate escort, retrieval of personal effects only, revocation of keycard access." I nodded. I turned back to Arthur. "Arthur Vance," I said. He finally looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Your services are no longer required," I said. The words tasted sweet. They tasted like champagne and copper. "You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises without your personal effects." Arthur blinked. Five minutes," he whispered. 4 minutes and 50 seconds now," I said, checking my watch. I looked at Frank. "If he is not in the elevator by the time the second hand sweeps 12, you are to physically remove him." "Do I make myself clear?" Frank straightened up. He understood the new hierarchy. He understood who signed the checks now. "Crystal clear, Ms. Cross." Frank stepped forward. His heavy boots thudded against the floor. He walked over to Arthur's chair. "Mr. Vance," Frank said, his voice dropping an octave into his professional guard tone. "Let's go." Arthur looked at Frank. Then he looked at his lawyers. The 5 men in the expensive suits were already packing their briefcases. They were snapping latches shut. They were sliding papers into folders. They didn't look at Arthur. They were distancing themselves from the corpse. "You're just going to let her do this?" Arthur pleaded, his voice rising to a shrill whine. "I pay your retainers." The lead counsel, a gray-haired shark named Sterling, paused. He looked at me. He offered a polite, deferential nod. Then he looked at Arthur. "Actually, Arthur," Sterling said smoothly, "the company pays our retainers, and Ms. Cross is the company." Sterling stood up. Ms. Cross, we will have the transition documents on your desk by morning. See that you do, I said. Sterling signaled his team. They filed out of the room, a school of fish abandoning a sinking ship. Arthur was alone. Frank put a hand on Arthur's shoulder. It wasn't gentle. Time is ticking, sir, Frank said. Arthur stood up. He wobbled. He grabbed his briefcase. Leave it, I commanded. Arthur froze. That's my briefcase. Bought the assets, Arthur, I said. That briefcase was purchased with company funds in 2019. It stays. He looked at the leather handle in his grip. He looked at me. He opened his hand. The briefcase hit the floor with a heavy thud. He looked stripped. He looked naked in his three-piece suit. You're cruel, he whispered. I'm efficient, I corrected. You taught me that. I pointed to the door. Go, Arthur turned. He walked toward the exit. He dragged his feet. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked like a child who had lost his mother in a supermarket. Frank followed close behind him, a dark shadow guiding him out of history. They reached the double glass doors. Arthur paused. He put his hand on the handle. He didn't look back. He pushed the door open and stepped into the hallway. Frank followed. The door swung shut. Click. Silence rushed back into the room. It roared in my ears. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty chair at the head of the table. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It was beating so hard I could see the fabric of my blouse jumping with the rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I was 23 years old. My hands started to shake. I placed them flat on the cool mahogany table to steady them. It was over. I had done it. I had climbed the mountain, killed the dragon, and taken the castle. Ms. Cross, I jumped slightly. It was Elias, my own lawyer. He was still sitting to my right, watching me with a look of cautious admiration. Are you all right? He asked. I looked at him. I forced my hands to stop trembling. I sat up straighter. I'm perfect, Elias, I said. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I walked around the table. I walked to the head of the table. I stood behind Arthur's chair, no, my chair. I ran my hand along the top of the leather. It was still warm from his body heat. I frowned. Get someone in here to change this chair, I said. Burn it, I want a new one, white leather, ergonomic. Noted, Elias said, writing on his pad. I walked past the chair and went to the window. The view was staggering. Manhattan sprawled out beneath me, a grid of gray and gold pulsing with life. I could see the park. I could see the river. I could see the tiny, ant-sized people rushing down Fifth Avenue. I pressed my palm against the glass. It was cold. And Elias? I said, not turning around. Yes, Ms. Cross. Get me the HR files from 2019 to present, I said, specifically the termination records. I watched a helicopter cut across the sky. There are a lot of good people Arthur fired because they threatened his ego, I said softly. I want to bring them home. I'll have the list within the hour, Elias said. And call the locksmith, I added. I want every lock in this building changed by sunset. My keycard should be the only one that works for the executive floor. Understood. I took a deep breath. The air in the office smelled different now. The stench of sandalwood and fear was fading. It was being replaced by something else. Possibility. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't see the scared girl with the blue binder anymore. I saw a CEO. I saw a predator who had eaten the king. I smiled. Welcome to Cross Global, I whispered to the city.